Okay, so you've sent us some a really compelling material this time. It's a report called The Cost of Living, Real Talk from Real Americans.
Yeah, it's quite something. It blends personal stories, interviews with broader socioeconomic data.
Exactly. And our plan here is to really dig into it, to pull out the key insights about the economic pressures people are facing.
And the human cost behind those numbers, we're looking at the big essentials: shelter, food, work, and health.
Right. And something jumped out right away, this quote. It feels like the goalposts keep moving further away no matter how hard we work. That really sets the tone, doesn't it?
It really does. It taps into this widespread feeling that working hard doesn't guarantee stability anymore. Like the old deal is kind of fraying.
A fraying social contract, the report calls it, more productive work. And it just doesn't seem to lead to economic security like maybe it used to.
And that gap, it's not just about numbers. It changes how families plan, limit savings, upward mobility. It can trap people, you
Yeah.
know.
hmm And that leads to another point the report makes right up front, the psychological toll. It's not just about budgets.
No, it's the constant anxiety, how it clouds your decisions, just diminishes your quality of life, really.
Okay, so let's get into the
Right.
specifics, starting with maybe the biggest one for many, shelter, housing.
Yeah, the report frames housing as a fundamental challenge, and it dives straight into the affordability crisis.
Rents going up faster than incomes, right?
Exactly. There's this example: an urban nurse working 60 hours a week, her rent jumped $700 in 2 years.
Wow, 60 hours. And still facing
It
that.
just shows the reality behind the statistics.
And it illustrates that term house poor, doesn't it? So much income just goes to keeping a roof overhead.
Leaves very little for anything else.
Yeah.
And the report mentions bidding wars, even for rentals. Just intense competition.
Right, which sounds incredibly stressful.
And it's interesting, the report stresses this isn't just a big city problem. There are geographic differences.
How so?
Well, cities have the super high costs, obviously. But then rural areas might lack enough quality, affordable housing. The houses might be cheaper, but need a lot of work.
Or they're far from jobs, right? So you save on rent but spend a ton on commuting.
Exactly. That commute cost can eat up any savings real quick.
And what about buying a home? The whole idea of a starter home seems different now.
Yeah, the report talks about the vanishing starter home, rising mortgage rates, saving for a down payment is tougher, plus investors competing for properties.
That story about the couple seeing $500,000 as their starter home price, that says a lot.
It really does. And that's just the sticker price.
Right, those are the hidden costs.
Property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, it all adds up fast.
The report also talks about something called the financialization of housing.
Hmm.
What does that mean exactly?
Basically, more big companies, corporate landlords, investment firms buying up properties. Yeah, property flipping too.
And how does that affect regular people looking for a place to live?
Well, it shifts the focus. Housing becomes more of an investment asset to generate profit, maybe less of a basic need.
So decisions about rent hikes or maintenance might be driven more by maximizing returns for investors.
That's the concern raised. It can push rents up, maybe lead to less focus on tenant needs, and potentially make it harder for individuals and families to find stable, affordable places.
And that instability, it has knock-on effects, right? Evictions, moving all the time.
Oh, huge effects. The report really emphasizes this. It disrupts jobs, schooling for kids, breaks down community ties, even impacts health. A whole cascade.
Yeah, you can see how that would happen.
And this idea of housing deserts was interesting too, not just in cities, but in other areas too.
Meaning places where there just isn't enough decent housing available.
Exactly. Even if prices aren't sky high, there might be a sheer lack of safe, habitable options because of long-term disinvestment or just aging housing stock.
Okay, so housing is a massive piece. Let's shift to another basic need, food, sustenance.
Right. And the pressure there is increasing too. Those rising grocery bills everyone's feeling.
Yeah, that feels very immediate.
The report has these personal stories, like a parent having to switch from fresh fruit to more pasta and cheaper meat just to make the budget work.
Those kinds of trade-offs,
Yeah.
they're tough.
And it can lead to food insecurity, meaning food banks, SNAP. The report touches on the potential feelings of shame around that too.
And the fact that those programs often have limits.
Definitely. And people cope in difficult ways, skipping meals, buying less healthy food because it's cheaper.
Which ties into the food desert issue again. Lack of supermarkets, transportation costs.
Yeah, big barriers to getting fresh food. So
Yeah.
people end up relying on convenience stores, fast food.
And the report connects that directly to health outcomes, poor nutrition leading to chronic diseases.
It's a clear link. And this idea of the shrinking middle in food choices is interesting.
Mean.
It's harder to afford nutritious, decent food without either breaking the bank or needing assistance. That middle ground is getting squeezed.
Plus, it's not just the money, is it? It's the time and mental energy.
Oh, absolutely. The report calls it the time cost. All the planning, couponing, maybe driving to multiple stores, cooking everything from scratch. It's like a second job for some people.
Exhausting just thinking about it.
And then layer on the anxiety about supply chains, global events hitting prices. It creates this feeling of powerlessness.
Okay, so people are struggling to afford shelter and food. How about earning the money in the first place? Let's talk about earning a living.
Yeah, the report really digs into the challenges around jobs and wages. Wage stagnation is a huge theme.
Paychecks just not keeping up with costs.
Precisely. There's an example of a worker getting, say, a 3% raise, but rent and groceries go up way more. So, in real terms, they're actually falling behind.
Even with a raise, that's tough.
And then there's the gig economy, precarious work. The report acknowledges the flexibility angle, but also the lack of benefits, job security, predictable income. That constant hustle without a safety net, it sounds incredibly draining.
Yeah, really unstable.
And the report talks about how the definition of a good job seems to be changing, or maybe disappearing for some. Fewer stable, well-paid jobs with benefits, even for people with education or skills.
Underemployment, too. People working jobs below their skill level.
Exactly. Skilled tradespeople, recent graduates, finding work that really matches their qualifications and pays accordingly can be hard.
And we see people working multiple jobs, this hustle culture.
Yeah, but the report suggests it often masks, financial desperation, and it leads to burnout.
There's also a point about productivity versus pay.
Right, productivity has generally gone up over the years, workers are producing more, but compensation hasn't really kept pace proportionally.
Which must lead to a feeling of unfairness.
Definitely a sense of unfairness, the report suggests, and goes beyond just poverty stats. It talks about an erosion of economic dignity.
Economic dignity. What does that mean here?
It's about self-worth, hope for the future. Even if you're employed, if you're constantly struggling, it affects your sense of value and possibility.
And that ties into the credential trap.
Yeah, that's a key concept. Needing more and more education or credentials for jobs that don't necessarily pay more.
So you take on student debt, but there's no guarantee of a better economic outcome.
Exactly. It's a tough spot for many younger people especially.
Okay, this is a lot. Let's move to the fourth pillar. The healthcare burden.
Another area causing huge financial and emotional strain, according to the report.
High costs for care, for insurance.
Absolutely. Rising premiums, high deductibles, co-pays. There's a quote in there, someone saying they have insurance basically to avoid bankruptcy if something major happens, not because they can actually afford routine care easily.
Wow. So people delay care. Or avoid it altogether.
Very often, yes, because
Yeah.
of the cost.
And even with insurance, medical debt is a huge problem.
Devastating. High deductibles mean you can still face huge bills. It wipes out savings, wrecks credit scores, can even lead to bankruptcy.
And for those without insurance or who are underinsured,
It's even more precarious. Foregoing care, skipping medications, using the ER as a primary source of care sometimes. There's this pervasive fear of getting sick.
the report also calls out mental health access specifically.
Yeah, often less coverage, harder to find providers who take insurance, really high out-of-pocket costs. It puts needed care out of reach for many.
So there's this idea of healthcare insecurity.
Exactly. It's not just about being uninsured. It's the constant anxiety about affording care even if you have insurance because of deductibles, surprise bills, lack of price transparency.
And that anxiety affects life choices.
Big time. The report suggests it influences decisions about jobs, starting families, major life plans.
And because of the cost, people end up rationing care.
Essentially, yes. Delaying procedures, choosing cheaper but maybe less effective treatments, skipping preventive care. And this hits lower-income folks and people with chronic conditions hardest.
And medical debt can trap people economically too, right?
Absolutely. Wage garnishment, damaged credit, preventing loans or housing, draining family resources. It can hinder mobility and even contribute to poverty across generations.
Okay, so these are the big themes. The report also looks at how this plays out differently across the country, right? In the Echoes from Main Street section.
Yes, crucial point. The cost of living isn't the same everywhere. You have the well-known expensive hotspots, but also places facing a quiet crisis,
A quiet crisis.
where costs maybe haven't exploded quite as dramatically, but they've risen significantly relative to local incomes or specific local factors create hardship.
So it's relative to what people earn locally.
Exactly. The report suggests using little snapshots, maybe a quote about housing bidding wars from a coastal city, another about stagnant wages in the Midwest, maybe something about lack of services in the South, to show that variety.
That makes sense. And it looks at different groups, too, demographics.
hmm Young adults with student debt, struggling with entry-level housing, relying on gig work, families with kids facing insane childcare costs.
That point about childcare costing more than rent sometimes, that's staggering.
It really is. Then seniors on fixed incomes, squeezed by healthcare, prescriptions, rising property taxes, having to make impossible choices like medicine versus food.
Heartbreaking.
And it highlights challenges for specific communities, immigrants facing language or credential barriers, communities of color dealing with wage gaps and housing discrimination, rural areas with transportation or service access issues.
It really shows how these pressures pile up, the domino effect you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, a rise in one area, like rent, pushes people towards needing help in another, like food banks. It's all connected.
The report uses a hypothetical table, regional cost snapshot, to show these variations visually.
Yeah, like showing different median rents, grocery costs, incomes, healthcare spending, childcare costs across different made-up regions. It drives home that it's not one single experience.
And it stresses intersectionality.
Right, how race, gender, age, location, these factors intersect and can compound the economic pressures. The example of a single mother of color facing multiple barriers at once really illustrates that.
And the big picture outcome is potentially less social mobility, class divides getting wider.
That's the concern raised. When people work hard but can't get ahead, it's harder to save, invest in the future, move up.
Which leads into the next section, the human ledger, connecting personal stories to bigger trends.
Exactly. The idea is that these individual stories aren't just anecdotes, they are the data. They make up this human ledger showing the real cost.
It pulls together the challenges across housing, food, jobs, healthcare, and uses that quote.
It's not just one thing, it's everything. You're constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Peter and Paul are both broke.
That sums it up pretty powerfully.
It does, and the common threads emerge. Working harder for less progress, that constant anxiety, the feeling the American dream is slipping away, wages and safety nets just not being enough.
And it links these struggles back to policy decisions, or lack of them.
Yeah, things like zoning laws affecting housing supply, minimum wage debates, healthcare regulations, labor laws. It connects the dots between personal experience and policy choices.
There's another table mentioned, summarizing challenges, coping mechanisms, emotional impact for each area.
Yes, summary of core challenges from interviews.
Yeah.
Lays it out clearly. The problem, how people cope and how it feels across shelter, sustenance, livelihood, healthcare, really highlights the human cost.
And this point about essentials being treated like luxuries or investments.
Right. A fundamental misalignment, the report suggests, between market forces and basic human well-being when things like housing or healthcare become primarily investment vehicles.
What are the broader implications discussed? A lost decade or lost generation?
That's the potential danger highlighted. Reduced consumer spending overall, maybe less innovation, more demand on social services, and possibly more political polarization if these trends continue.
It's a pretty sobering analysis, but the report does end by looking forward, right? Forging resilience.
It does. It shifts towards solutions and resilience. It shares stories of how people and communities cope and support each other.
Like what?
Things like bartering, sharing skills, mutual aid networks, neighbors sharing food, tenants organizing together, resourcefulness.
And advocacy, people pushing for change.
Yes, individual and collective efforts. And then it translates these experiences into potential policy ideas.
Okay, what kind of policy?
For housing, more investment in affordable housing, maybe rent stabilization, stronger tenant rights, ways to curb speculation. For food, strengthening S&AP, finding ways to get fresh food into food deserts, supporting local food.
Makes sense. And for jobs and healthcare.
For jobs, maybe linking minimum wage to cost of living, better protections for all workers, including gig workers, making it easier to unionize, job training. For healthcare, expanding affordable insurance, controlling drug and medical costs, tackling medical debt through billing reform.
A common theme seems to be listening to people's actual experiences when making policy.
absolutely fundamental, the report argues. And it stresses that resilience can't just be on individuals. We need systemic changes, too.
You can't just tell people to be more resilient when the system itself creates these pressures.
Exactly. And that ties into the idea of investing in social infrastructure.
Affordable housing, healthcare, education, safety nets, seeing those not as costs, but as investments.
Investments in people, in long-term prosperity in a stable society. The report flips it, asking what's the cost of not having adequate social infrastructure?
Lost productivity, homelessness, people not reaching their potential, strain on emergency services.
All of that. So wrapping up this deep dive into the sources you sent, what stands out most to you?
For me, it's definitely how interconnected everything is. Housing affects food choices, affects health, affects ability to work. You can't really separate them.
Yeah.
And just the sheer weight of it all on people, the constant stress and feeling of running in place, even working incredibly hard. The personal stories really drive that home.
I agree. That disconnect between hard work and basic security is stark. And those themes, working harder for less, anxiety about the future, they just echo throughout the report.
Yeah. But there's also that undercurrent of resilience, people finding ways to cope, wanting things to be different.
Definitely. That desire for change is palpable. And the report's final message is really about rethinking priorities.
Recalibrating the American balance sheet.
Yeah, putting human well-being and economic security front and center, suggesting that a truly strong economy is one where everyone can have a stable, dignified life.
It's a powerful thought. So, for you listening, something to think about. Reflecting on all this, what specific part of the cost of living challenge really resonated with your own experience or observations? And looking ahead, what kinds of changes, big or small, personal or systemic, do you think could help build a more sustainable and fair future for everyone?